the beginning of August, and the plane trees at the Hinamaru Street entrance to the government gardens have had their annual winter haircut and stand waiting, like the rest of the district, for a spring that is still a month away. Nearby, a statue commemorates the service of a now largely forgotten local, Frederick Wiley, a soldier who served in the Boer War. And now, at the start of the month, comes news that may see an addition to the monuments here. This Daily Post front page story breaks the news of a decision by the Rotorua Energy Charitable Trust to fund a new statue in remembrance of another local identity. A figure world famous through the 1930s who, far from her Rotorua birthplace, died in obscurity with her achievements all but forgotten. For Rotorua residents, all that is about to change. The Jean Batten statue saga is about to dominate the news and provoke public comment for some months to come. It's reported that one charitable trustee, Lyle Thurston, has a particular interest in the statue project going ahead.
I think I've had a fascination with aviation all my life, and living in Rotorua, of course, you are told at great length about the history of Jean Batten and the fact that she was born and raised in Rotorua. In fact, she was born in a house in House Street opposite St Luke's Church, and there's a plaque there that records the event, and she was born there in 1909, and her father was a dentist in Rotorua, and I know from everything that I studied about her, she too had a fascination with aviation, and by year 10 had a burning desire to learn to fly. As the story goes, mother took Jean to England to pursue flying lessons, and the rest is all history. And she became one of the greatest aviators in world history, and I firmly believe if she's not the greatest sports person New Zealand's ever produced, she'd be very close to it. And that sort of got me on the path of really pushing for some formal acknowledgement in the town or city of her birth as to what she'd actually achieved.
Lyle Thurston is only one of a high-powered working committee that has been developing the statue concept to the stage where a life-size sculpture could start to be produced, with funding to the tune of $100,000 being provided.
It was essentially the Rotorua Energy Charitable Trust that swung its weight behind this initiative in terms of dollars, and they were very easily persuaded, the trustees of the day, to buy into the concept that an acknowledgement of Jean Batten's achievements was long overdue.
But the Charitable Trust decision to fund the Jean Batten statue is about to land the organisation in some very hot water indeed. Later in the week comes the news of someone else with hot water problems. A major tourist attraction, the Polynesian Spa, has just detected higher than normal concentrations of hydrogen sulfide in some of its pools. The story highlights the concerns expressed in last month's report that the distinctive Rotorua aroma could be causing serious health issues for some. In fact, the Polynesian Spa has already featured in the headlines back in May, when one of their bathers, a well-known New Zealand artist, was found comatose, presumably overcome by the effects of the sulphury gas. Despite treatment, she later died in Rotorua Hospital. With the inquest for that incident still in the pipeline, OSH and the Polynesian Spa have been more closely monitoring hydrogen sulfide levels. Both the Priest and Radium pools have failed a pass mark, and for the time being have been closed for further use.
It just seemed to us that it was just stalling it because of the problem was big and the problem was going to cost.
Spokesman Brentley Bond and members of the Moorea-Akawa Bay Action Group may have been satisfied with the exposure their water quality problems achieved with last month's TVNZ current affairs item on Lake Rotoiti, but their complaints about inaction remain ongoing. Steve Chadwick may be enjoying the glow of success as her controversial anti-smoking legislation passes its second reading in Parliament. virtually ensuring it will become law. But in her home electorate, a rising level of dissatisfaction is being expressed over her handling of the water quality issue. Outraged Rotorua residents have just learned that central government have made a commitment to spend millions of dollars dealing with Lake Taupo's water quality problems. But Taupo's success has been brought about by a 4-year project involving the Taupo District Council, Environment Waikato and local iwi working together. So far, a similar cohesiveness over the Rotorua Lakes issue still seems a long way off. Now the latest meeting of the Lakes Water Quality Society produces more gloomy news. Various experts are of the opinion that the depletion of oxygen caused by Lake Rotorua's algal blooms has reached the stage where the days of trout fishing on the lake may be numbered.
If you don't bring those that are going to pee outside the tent into the tent, you're going to have a problem. And so I think I did help in getting the Lakes Water Quality View to Graham and say this is something we've got to do something about. We were more concerned about sewage at the time, and sewage schemes.
And at that point, I think an urgency crept into the thinking of council.
As the fight to maintain Rotorua's share of the tourism cake continues, and acknowledging the criticism of lack of growth in the region, the RDC has decided on a name change that reflects new marketing objectives. Tourism Rotorua is to become Destination Rotorua. But there's a problem. It's been discovered that the proposed new name has already been claimed by a couple of local businessmen, and getting the rights to Destination Rotorua will need to be negotiated, possibly a long and expensive process. A Daily Post editorial questions the need for such a name change, pointing to its recent headline announcing a major business coup for the district. Thanks to Rotorua's central location, the National Fire Service have just announced that Eastgate Park will be the site for a multi-million-dollar training centre. It's a development that should bring substantial benefits and spin-offs to the local commercial sector. And in the District Council, there is cautious optimism that this might be an indication of better things to come. An even greater degree of District Council caution is being applied to the consideration of a piece of government legislation passed 5 weeks ago. The Prostitution Reform Bill is designed to give a form of protection to sex workers, but also gives local bodies the power to regulate their activities.
It's a time of when central government were trying to get local decisions made at a local level, and that makes a lot of sense. But every time they produced new legislation that required local authorities to put in place policies, bylaws and so on, there came a cost. And this cost shifting, as they call it, went on for a number of years. And whilst we as a community were able to develop the way we wanted to, because the local authority is much closer to our community than Wellington and central government, it came with a lot of costs. And to be honest, if you'd talked to me 2 or 3 years ago, ahead of the prostitution legislation, I wouldn't have ever dreamt that a local authority would be responsible for a bylaw for prostitution. This is New Zealand, for goodness sake.
The administration of the local sex industry and the enforcement of any new regulations will involve extra council expense. Perhaps a new layer of bureaucracy to handle licensing. Charles Sturt heads a committee to examine the implications. But it is the prospect of another piece of Labour government legislation that is now grabbing the headlines. Back in 1999, the Marlborough District Council saw a bright new growth opportunity with the development of the aquaculture industry. Until access to the rights to Marlborough South's water was challenged by local iwi. The issue raised the question of who actually does own the country's foreshore and seabed, and how far the customary rights of Māori might affect the use of these areas. The man appointed to hear the case in the Māori Land Court was Rotorua born and bred Judge Ken Hingston.
It began as a claim. What had happened, the Marlborough people had tried to get into the aquafishing, aquaculture, and they were being frustrated horribly by one, bigger companies having a go, and more by the local authorities. So they, in their wisdom, decided that they would investigate the possibility that they had ownership rights, which they did. They put in an application, and I looked at it, and then I called them together, called the parties together, which includes the Crown, and I said, well, look, firstly, we will decide whether they have a claim before we go into the claim. And the claim would mean proving customary usages and defending it from invaders and all that sort of thing. But first we will decide on the legal issues.
So began one of the most contentious of national issues, based on the simple question, do Marlborough iwi have the right to make their claim? It was his last case before retirement, and Judge Hingston knew his decision would have far-reaching implications.
I said, yes, they can. Those rights still exist. They haven't been taken away. And those were rights that were there before the Treaty of Waitangi. So it came to pass. There was an immediate appeal which went to the Maori Appellate Court, which referred it on what's called a case stated to the High Court, who said Hingston's wrong. Okay. The Tauihu people, or the Marlborough people, Māori, they appealed to the Court of Appeal. And that's one line in that Court of Appeal judgment I remember clearly, and I always remember was Judge Hingston was right.
It has taken 3 years for the matter with its attendant controversy to get this far, and now August 2003 sees Helen Clark taking the decision that the matter will be settled in the government's favour, not by a further appeal, but by legislation.
It didn't bother me that it was my decision that was being tipped over. It was the way it was being done. Because I thought, hey, my decision's been tipped over years ago. It didn't worry me, that side of it. But I thought it was wrong that she didn't consult first her own MPs, who I'm pretty sure would have said, look, let's have a talk with Māori. She just said, we're going to legislate. Very political. And it came to pass. Yeah, I was really mad at the way things were done and no consultation.
A similar lack of consultation is implied in the story accompanying this Daily Post headline. There has been a wave of public sentiment against the Energy Trust Ian Batten statute decision.
The nub of the argument there was that she only spent her first 4 years in Rotorua, and why, when she was so readily commemorated elsewhere around the city, I believe it was 7 other places, did we need another $100,000 statue?
There are letters to the editor of the Daily Post, a lot of letters, all opposed to the idea of spending $100,000 of community funds on a statue. It's a rare occurrence for the Energy Trust funding decision to be publicly challenged, and a Daily Post editorial continues the debate. For the moment, Judith Keeney and her trust board stand their ground. Although the next local body elections are over a year away, both Rotorua's newspapers have been conducting street surveys, taking the public pulse regarding attitudes towards the performance of the current mayor, and speculating on the chances of any likely alternatives. In a small front-page article, Graham Hall confirms he will be standing for another term. If successful, he will become the district's longest-serving mayor ever.
I thought, better to tell people where you're coming from or where you are, take away the doubt that anybody might have. And I was getting quite a bit of pressure from a lot of people to say, hey, don't back off now, we're on the road to getting things done. The skill is to knowing when to stop and when to keep going.
But of course we all knew then that Graham Hall was there for life, should he have chosen to do so, and was a very popular mayor for Rotorua and was very good at promoting Rotorua causes.
Nevertheless, in the last week of August, Phil Campbell's opinion piece in the Rotorua Review questions whether it's time for a new face at the top.
He could polarise views within council, but Graham worked at having the numbers. Whether it was necessarily good for the public at large, we don't know, but nevertheless he worked at it very well.
It's the last days of August and a few matters are coming to a head. At the District Council, the press and public are excluded as talks continue about the future of Rotorua's airport. The Lakes Water Quality Society chairman Ian McLean announces he is at last seeing some evidence of a new spirit of cooperation between the RDC and the Regional Council, as a mountain of scientific data begins to point to how the lakes clean-up should proceed. And the government is hailing its proposed seabed and foreshore legislation as a win-win solution, despite many predicting stormy seas ahead. And although this Daily Post editorial has a strident tone, there are letters trickling in supporting Rec's funding of the Dean Batten statue. And the Trust is still standing firm on its decision, not the least because the contract for the statue is already signed and sealed. And that's that.